I am Julian, 28 years old. Just a few hours ago, my own flesh and blood, my older brother Caleb, grabbed me by the shoulders, ripped me out of my wheelchair, and threw me straight into a $10,000 crystal champagne tower. While I was lying on the imported marble floor, bleeding from dozens of cuts and completely unable to move my paralyzed legs to save myself, my parents looked down at me and told a room of 200 elite guests that I was faking my spinal injury for attention. They actually stood there and let people laugh, calling me a bitter, jealous cripple who just wanted to ruin my brother's perfect day. But there is one thing they didn't know. The elegant older gentleman who had just dropped his drink and rushed over to stabilize my shattered neck wasn't just some random wedding guest. And right now, my parents and my golden child brother are desperately begging the police not to lock him up. Before I tell you exactly how this incredible downfall happened, please hit that like button if you believe that true justice always catches up with toxic people. And do me a favor, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. It always amazes me how far these stories reach. Now, let's go back to where this nightmare actually began. The sound of a $200 bottle of Dom Perignon shattering on the hard-tiled floor didn't scare me nearly as much as the manic, unhinged look in my brother Caleb's eyes. I had known Caleb my entire life. I knew his temper. I knew how he operated when he felt his absolute authority was being questioned. I knew the lengths he would go to in order to maintain his pristine, perfectly curated public image. But I had never, not once in my 28 years of existence, seen him look at me with such pure, unadulterated hatred. He stood over me, his custom-tailored designer suit completely ruined by the cascading waterfall of sparkling wine, screaming that my black wheelchair looked like an ugly lump of coal that was actively destroying his flawless engagement aesthetic. He didn't just bump into me. This was no accident. He planted his feet, firmly grasped the lapels of my jacket, dug his fingers painfully under my arms, and launched me straight into the massive glass tower of champagne that stood as the centerpiece of the botanical garden. It was an elaborate pyramid of crystal glasses, stacked 7 levels high, gleaming under the afternoon sun like a monument to his excessive wealth and ego. Blood mixed with the golden sparkling wine almost immediately. I hit the ground with a sickening thud. Because of my T10 complete spinal injury, I have absolutely no core control and zero ability to brace myself with my legs. A person with full mobility would have instinctively stepped back, thrown their arms out to catch their weight, or at least shifted their hips to absorb the impact. I had none of those options. I fell like a dead weight, my upper body crashing through the delicate crystal, taking hundreds of heavy glasses down with me. Sharp, searing pain bloomed across my face, my neck, and my hands as I instinctively brought my arms up to shield my eyes from the exploding shards of glass. The sound was incredible, a cascading crash of breaking glass that sounded like wind chimes made of pure violence. Hundreds of shards exploded outward, raining down on me and the pristine white marble tiles beneath us. A heavy bottle from the top tier plummeted down and struck my shoulder bone with a heavy, hollow knock before rolling away into the growing puddle of pink-tinted liquid. I couldn't move my legs to stand up. I couldn't even roll over properly because the slick mixture of expensive champagne and my own warm blood made the floor like ice. The entire garden went dead silent. The Baroque string quartet playing near the fountain screeched to a halt, the cellist dropping his bow in sheer terror. The idle chatter of the wealthy real estate investors, socialites, and corporate executives faded into a horrifying, suffocating hush. There were no gasps of concern. There were no immediate rushes to help me. There was only the dripping of wine from the table edge and the ragged sound of my own shallow breathing. And in that deafening silence, I heard Caleb's voice, high, hysterical, and entirely focused on himself. He didn't drop to his knees to ask if his younger brother was alive. He didn't scream for a medic or tell someone to call an ambulance. He pointed a shaking, furious finger at my bleeding body on the floor and shouted to his beautiful, wealthy fiancée and her entire family that I had thrown myself into the glass on purpose. He looked right into the crowd of our relatives and his future in-laws, his voice echoing across the manicured lawns. He told them I was a dramatic fake. He told them I was a pathetic, attention-seeking loser who couldn't stand the fact that he was successful and happy. He told them that my wheelchair was just a prop I used to manipulate our parents out of their money, and that this entire stunt was just my way of stealing his spotlight. And the most sickening part? My mother and father stepped up right behind him, nodding in silent agreement, their faces masks of embarrassed annoyance rather than parental horror. I laid there, staring up at the pastel floral arrangements twisting around the white columns of the estate, feeling the warm blood run down my collar and soak into the fabric of my shirt. I thought about how hard I had fought just to survive the last 2 years. I thought about the sheer amount of physical and emotional agony I had endured to rebuild a tiny fraction of my independence, the countless hours of physical therapy, the dark nights staring at the ceiling wondering if my life was still worth living. I thought about how much I had sacrificed for this family, only for it to culminate in this ultimate public humiliation. But Caleb had made a fatal mistake. He was so caught up in his own narcissistic rage, so obsessed with controlling the narrative and protecting his image, that he didn't notice the older man stepping out from the crowd of stunned onlookers. Caleb was too busy protecting his massive real estate promotion and his pending inheritance to realize that he had just committed a violent felony in broad daylight. He didn't know that the man who knelt beside me in the puddle of blood and wine, not caring about his elegant suit, placing his firm, steady hands on either side of my head to secure my cervical spine with the practiced motion of a top medical expert, was the one person in that entire venue who held the absolute power to destroy Caleb's life. He didn't know that his perfect lie was about to be dismantled piece by piece. To truly understand how a biological brother could be so relentlessly cruel, and how my own parents could stand by and watch it happen without shedding a single tear for their bleeding son, I need to take you back. Not just to the beginning of the party, but to a dark, rainy night exactly 2 years ago. Because the story Caleb told everyone about why I am paralyzed from the waist down is a carefully constructed, heavily guarded, entirely fabricated lie. And the truth involves a massive cover-up, a desperate grab for status, and a betrayal so deep it still makes my chest tight when I think about it. 2 years ago, I was 26 years old and at the absolute top of my game. I had just landed a highly coveted junior architect position at one of the most prestigious commercial design firms in the city. I was pulling in a great salary, building an incredible portfolio, and looking forward to finally buying my first home. I had my entire life mapped out in front of me, full of blueprints, construction sites, and endless possibilities. Caleb, on the other hand, was 30. He was the classic golden child, the handsome, charismatic older brother who could do absolutely no wrong in our parents' eyes. He was working as a broker in high-end commercial real estate, dealing with multimillion-dollar properties and rubbing elbows with the city's elite. He was incredibly ambitious, but he was also fundamentally reckless. He cut corners. He always cut corners, and he always expected someone else to clean up his mess. It was the night of my architecture firm's annual gala. Caleb had insisted on driving me to the event in his brand new Porsche 911, a ridiculously expensive sports car he had bought entirely on credit purely to project an image of extreme wealth to his upper-crust clients. He was aggressively trying to land a massive promotion to senior partner at his brokerage, and he wanted to be seen dropping off his successful architect brother at a high-society event. It was all about optics for Caleb. Everything always was. The weather that night was completely unforgiving. It was raining heavily, the kind of torrential downpour that turns the asphalt into a slick, dangerous mirror. The roads were treacherous, and Caleb, despite the conditions, was fighting with his girlfriend over text messages. I clearly remember the blue glow of his phone screen illuminating his angry, clenched jaw in the dark cabin of the car. I sat in the passenger seat, my heart pounding against my ribs, gripping the door handle so hard my knuckles turned white. I watched the digital speedometer climb way past the legal limit as he aggressively navigated the winding roads. "Caleb, put the phone down," I told him, my voice tight with genuine anxiety. "The roads are awful right now. You can't see 10 feet in front of you. Just pull over if you need to text her back. It's not worth it." He didn't even look up from the screen. His thumbs moved furiously over the glass. "Relax, Julian. I've got it under control." This car handles perfectly. Don't be such a nervous wreck. You're ruining my mood. Those were the absolute last words I heard before the tires lost all traction. He hit a sharp curve way too fast while looking down at a text message. The rear of the Porsche fishtailed violently, hydroplaning on a massive sheet of standing water. I saw the massive, ancient oak tree rushing toward the windshield at a terrifying speed. I remember the deafening, bone-rattling sound of metal crushing inwards, the smell of deploying airbags and burning rubber, and then a sudden, absolute darkness that swallowed me whole. When I finally woke up, I was lying in a sterile white hospital room. The rhythmic, agonizing beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the suffocating silence. The air smelled of heavy antiseptics. I tried to sit up, but my body wouldn't obey. I couldn't feel my legs. I tried to move my toes, a simple, basic command my brain had executed flawlessly for 26 years without a second thought, and absolutely nothing happened. It was a terrifying, isolating emptiness, like the bottom half of my body had simply vanished into thin air. Panic seized my throat. My parents were standing at the foot of my bed, but they weren't crying tears of joy that I was finally awake. They didn't rush forward to hug me or kiss my forehead. They looked panicked, furtive. They looked like criminals plotting their next move. Before the doctor even came into the room to deliver the official medical diagnosis, my mother leaned over me. Her eyes were darting nervously toward the closed door of the hospital room. "Julian, honey, you have to listen to me very carefully," she whispered, gripping my hand tight enough to cause pain. "The police are waiting right outside in the hallway. They need a formal statement about the crash. Caleb is looking at serious jail time. His blood alcohol was 0, but the police found his phone on the driver's side floorboard. They checked the timestamps. They know he was texting at the exact moment of impact. If he gets charged with reckless driving causing grievous bodily harm, his real estate career is completely over. He will lose his broker's license. He will lose his promotion. His life will be ruined." I stared at her through the heavy, disorienting haze of intravenous painkillers. I had just woken up from a near-death experience to find out my spine was completely shattered, and her very first concern, her absolute priority, was Caleb's real estate license. My father stepped up next, his face grim and determined. "Julian, listen to your mother. You have a completely clean record. You weren't driving the vehicle. But if you tell the police that you grabbed the steering wheel, if you tell them that you caused the car to swerve because you were drunk and acting belligerent in the passenger seat, Caleb gets off with a slap on the wrist. You're an architect, your career doesn't depend on a clean driving record or a pristine public image the way his does. We will pay for the absolute best lawyer in the state to defend you. We will handle everything financially." I refused. Of course I refused. I tried to speak, my voice raspy and weak, telling them they were completely insane to ask me to take the blame for a crime I didn't commit while lying paralyzed in a hospital bed. But then Aunt Patricia arrived. She was my father's sister, the family's master manipulator, always speaking in a soft, sickeningly reasonable tone that made you feel like you were losing your mind for disagreeing with her. She sat by my hospital bed for hours, wearing me down psychologically while I was physically helpless and emotionally shattered. She reminded me of the college fund my parents had supposedly drained to pay for my expensive architecture degree, a debt she claimed I owed them. She brought up the massive family inheritance my grandparents had left, subtly but clearly hinting that if I sent Caleb to prison and destroyed the family's pristine reputation with a scandalous lawsuit, I would be cut out of the will entirely. They threatened to abandon me. They threatened to leave me to drown in mountains of medical debt with no support. They played on my guilt, my profound exhaustion, and my deeply ingrained familial loyalty. "Family protects family, Julian," Aunt Patricia said, gently stroking my forehead while driving a metaphorical knife into my back. "Caleb has to secure his future. You can work from a desk for the rest of your life. He needs his mobility and his reputation to show high-end properties. It's the right thing to do. Be a good brother." I was broken, physically and mentally decimated. In a moment of pure weakness, overwhelming fear, and drug-induced confusion, I agreed to their horrific terms. When the police finally came in, I told them a fabricated story. I confessed to a crime I didn't commit. I ruined my own reputation, painting myself as a reckless, drunken liability, entirely to save his. The official diagnosis came shortly after. T10 complete spinal cord injury. Paraplegia. The neurosurgeon who operated on me, a brilliant, stern, highly respected man who saved my life during an agonizing 8-hour emergency spinal fusion surgery, stood at the foot of my bed and told me the brutal, unvarnished truth. I would never walk again. I would spend the rest of my life in a wheelchair. Did Caleb drop to his knees and thank me for sacrificing my good name? Did my parents step up to support me through the most traumatic transition of my life? No, absolutely not. Once Caleb's legal troubles miraculously vanished thanks to my false confession, so did their gratitude. The family narrative shifted almost instantly. Within 6 months, the story wasn't that I had sacrificed my unblemished reputation to save my brother from prison. The story became that I was a reckless, out-of-control drunk who had ruined his own life and almost killed their precious Caleb in the process. They repeated the lie to our extended family, to our neighbors, to everyone who asked, until they started to truly believe it themselves. I was quietly pushed out of the family home. I moved into a cheap, barely accessible apartment on the edge of town. I lost my junior architect job because the commute, the inaccessible building, and the sheer physical toll were too much for me to handle in the beginning stages of my recovery. I had to pivot to doing low-paying freelance drafting work online just to afford basic groceries and medical supplies. My parents didn't offer a single dime to help me with my staggering medical bills. They told me I needed to learn independence and face the consequences of my drunken actions. Every single penny from my meager disability checks, every late-night drafting gig I stayed up until 3 a.m. to finish, went strictly into surviving. It took me a grueling year and a half to save $5,000 for an ultra-lightweight carbon fiber wheelchair. It weighed only 18 pounds. It was matte black, sleek, highly maneuverable, and it finally gave me my freedom back. It allowed me to navigate the difficult world without constantly begging strangers for help. During this incredibly dark period, the only bright light in my life was Elena. She was my physical therapist, a tough, deeply compassionate, no-nonsense woman who pushed me past my physical and mental limits every single day. She was the only person who saw through the family's lies. She saw the crippling panic attacks, the agonizing phantom nerve pains, the dark days when I physically couldn't bring myself to get out of bed. She became my anchor. She taught me how to live in this new body, how to safely transfer to my chair, how to dress myself, and most importantly, how to find immense value in my mind and my skills when my lower body felt entirely useless. Meanwhile, Caleb thrived. He got his coveted promotion to senior partner. He started dating Chloe, the stunning daughter of a billionaire commercial real estate developer. He was living the absolute high life, constantly posting photos from luxury yachts and private jets, while I was sitting in my tiny apartment carefully calculating whether I could afford my monthly nerve pain medication or if I had to skip a few doses to pay the electric bill. Then, the formal invitation arrived in my mailbox. Heavy, expensive cream cardstock, looping gold calligraphy. Caleb and Chloe's lavish engagement party. The dress code was strictly pastel colors. Spring pinks, mint greens, baby blues. The invitation specified in bold letters. No exceptions. Elena saw the expensive invitation sitting on my cheap kitchen counter and frowned deeply. Are you really going to go to this, Julian? They treat you like absolute garbage. You don't owe them anything. I have to, I told her, carefully adjusting the tension on the wheels of my chair. If I don't show up, they'll just tell everyone I'm bitter, jealous, and holding a grudge. I just want to show up, give my brother his gift, and leave quietly through the back. I won't give them a single reason to talk about me. I was so incredibly naive. I truly thought I could just blend into the background of his perfect day. I thought the worst of my family's betrayal was already behind me, buried in the past. I was so incredibly wrong. The massive wrought iron gates of the Magnolia Springs Botanical Garden swung open, revealing a level of ostentatious wealth that honestly made my stomach turn. It wasn't just an engagement party. It was a highly calculated, meticulously designed networking event, perfectly disguised as a celebration of love. The entire venue looked like a pastel fever dream pulled straight from a luxury magazine. There were towering walls of imported white roses, a Baroque string quartet playing classical music near a massive, intricately carved marble fountain, and formally dressed waiters carrying silver trays of imported caviar and vintage champagne. I rolled myself up the temporary accessible wooden ramp, wearing a pale blue linen suit I had found deeply discounted at a department store clearance rack. It was the absolute only pastel thing I owned that looked halfway decent and fit my seated frame properly. But my custom, ultra-lightweight carbon fiber wheelchair was a stark, uncompromising matte black. Against the endless sea of cream, mint, and blush pink worn by the guests, I stuck out like a sore thumb. I might as well have been wearing a flashing neon sign that said, "Flaw in the aesthetic." I scanned the massive crowd of socialites and finally spotted Caleb. He was standing near the towering champagne pyramid, wearing a custom-tailored ivory suit that probably cost more than my entire yearly salary, laughing loudly with a group of older men who looked like aggressive investment bankers. Chloe, his billionaire fiancée, stood right next to him in a stunning designer gown, smiling that perfect, practiced smile. I took a deep, steadying breath, tightly gripped the cold handrims of my chair, and pushed myself forward through the crowd. I approached them with complete sincerity. Despite everything they had done, despite the lies, the coercion, and the total abandonment, he was still my older brother. He was getting married. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small, elegantly wrapped velvet box. "Caleb, Chloe," I said, forcing a warm, genuine smile onto my face as I stopped beside them. "Congratulations to you both. It's a beautiful party." Caleb turned around, and the charming smile on his face instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer irritation. He looked at my face, then looked down at my black wheelchair, and his jaw visibly tightened. His eyes darted nervously around the venue to see which of his wealthy clients were watching our interaction. "Julian," he said, his voice clipped and cold, "you actually made it. I honestly didn't think you'd bother to leave your apartment for this." I ignored the passive-aggressive jab and held out the small velvet box. "I brought you a gift. It's a vintage silver money clip with our original family crest engraved on it. I found it at an estate sale and had it professionally restored and polished. To afford to buy and restore that silver clip, I had to take on 3 extra, grueling freelance drafting projects, working through the night until my eyes burned and my lower back ached with muscle spasms. I wanted to give him something meaningful, a token of our family history, something that showed I still cared despite the chasm between us." Caleb took the box with 2 fingers, popped it open, and literally sneered at the polished silver inside. "A used money clip? Seriously, Julian? I don't carry physical cash, and this looks old and tarnished. It doesn't exactly fit the luxury vibe we're going for today. Keep it." He carelessly tossed the velvet box onto a nearby cocktail table, right next to a crumpled, dirty napkin. He didn't even have the basic decency to say thank you. My chest tightened immediately, a familiar, heavy pressure building in my lungs as the rejection washed over me. I looked over at Chloe, hoping for some basic human empathy from my future sister-in-law, but she just offered a tight, incredibly uncomfortable smile, adjusted her diamond necklace, and quickly looked away. "Anyway, excuse us," Caleb muttered dismissively, waving a hand. "We have important high-net-worth guests to entertain. Try not to run over anyone's feet with that thing." He completely turned his back on me. I sat there, frozen, watching him walk confidently over to Chloe's parents. I couldn't hear everything he was saying over the music, but I could easily read his body language. He was pointing subtly in my direction. He leaned in close and whispered something directly to Chloe's mother. The older woman slowly turned her head, looked over at me sitting alone in my black chair, and her eyes filled with a toxic mixture of pity, suspicion, and outright disgust. Later, through the agonizing grapevine of family gossip, I would find out exactly what he was saying to them in that moment. He was telling Chloe's entire billionaire family that I suffered from severe Munchausen syndrome. He told them, with a straight face, that my spinal injury wasn't actually permanent. He claimed that top neurologists said I should be walking completely fine by now, but I aggressively refused to do the physical therapy because I absolutely loved the attention, the sympathy, and the monthly disability checks from the government. He painted me as a lazy, toxic, manipulative leech who was intentionally trying to guilt-trip him and ruin his big day with my sob story. I slowly wheeled myself away from the main gathering, finding a quiet, shaded corner near the rose bushes to hide. I felt physically sick. My hands were shaking. I just wanted to leave, to call an accessible cab and disappear. But before I could turn around, my parents intercepted my path. My mother marched over, her face flushed red with barely concealed anger beneath her expensive makeup. "Julian, what on earth are you doing? Why are you sitting over here sulking in the corner?" "I'm not sulking, Mom," I replied wearily. "Caleb just literally threw my thoughtful gift away like trash and is currently telling his future in-laws that I'm faking my paralysis to steal his thunder." My father scoffed loudly, crossing his arms. "Oh, for God's sake, stop being so dramatic and sensitive. Caleb is under an immense amount of stress right now. This marriage is huge for his career in the real estate market. And frankly, Julian, you showing up in that hideous, depressing black contraption isn't helping anyone. Couldn't you have draped a white sheet over it or painted it? You're completely ruining the aesthetic of the photos." I stared at them in utter disbelief. They were completely serious. My essential medical equipment, my literal substitute for human legs, was viewed purely as an inconvenience to their pastel color scheme. "It's a wheelchair, Dad. It's not a decorative prop," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed, fiery rage. Just then, my older cousin Marcus strolled over, holding a crystal glass of bourbon. Marcus worked as a junior agent at the exact same commercial real estate firm as Caleb. He always played the friendly, understanding middleman, the one who supposedly understood my struggles and sympathized with my situation. "Hey, Uncle Richard, Aunt Eleanor, give the guy a break," Marcus said smoothly, clapping a heavy, seemingly comforting hand on my shoulder. "Julian's doing his absolute best. It's incredibly hard being in his position." My parents huffed in annoyance, muttered something about ungrateful children, and walked away to mingle with the VIP investors. I let out a heavy, exhausted sigh, genuinely grateful for Marcus's timely intervention. "Thanks, man," I muttered, rubbing my temples. "I seriously don't know how much more of this toxic environment I can take. Caleb is acting like an absolute monster today." Marcus leaned in close, his voice dropping to a low, sympathetic whisper. "I know, Julian. It's messed up. It's totally unfair. Tell me about it. Just get it off your chest. How does it really feel seeing him parade around like a king after what he did to your life?" I took the bait. I desperately needed to vent, and I let my guard completely down. I told Marcus how utterly furious I was that Caleb was using my tragic reality to make himself look like a saint to his new family. I said some very angry, very raw things. I said I wished Caleb would lose everything: his job, his money, his promotion, and feel just a fraction of the devastating pain I felt every single day when I woke up unable to move. I didn't realize that Marcus had his smartphone resting casually on his knee, the screen facing down toward the grass. I didn't see the tiny, glowing red recording light. Marcus wasn't my friend. Marcus was Caleb's lapdog. He was secretly recording my angry, frustrated rant to play it back for Caleb later. It was the perfect, undeniable leverage. Marcus was desperately angling for a major promotion to a mid-level management position at their firm, and handing Caleb a high-quality audio file of his disabled brother acting unhinged, bitter, and threatening was his golden ticket. It gave Caleb the exact, tangible proof he needed to show Chloe's family that I was the unstable, toxic element in the family, justifying his cruelty. I was sitting in a beautiful garden surrounded by millions of dollars worth of rare flowers and extreme luxury, completely unaware that I was actively bleeding in a pool of hungry sharks. My own blood relatives were actively conspiring to destroy whatever little shred of dignity and peace I had left, all for the sake of real estate deals, corporate promotions, and social climbing. I gripped the wheels of my chair, telling myself to just endure it, to just make it through the next excruciating hour. Just smile for the mandatory family photos, and then I could go home to my quiet, safe apartment and never, ever speak to them again. But Caleb wasn't going to let me leave quietly. He needed a grand spectacle. He needed to assert his absolute dominance one final time before the day was over. About an hour into the lavish reception, as the sun began to dip and cast a golden hue over the estate, a loud clinking of a silver spoon against a crystal glass echoed across the perfectly manicured lawn. The hired photographer, an expensive-looking, pretentious guy with an earpiece and 3 massive cameras around his neck, started aggressively corralling everyone toward the grand, sweeping marble staircase for the official family portraits. "All right, everyone. We need the immediate family for the bride and groom front and center," the photographer called out, waving his arms. I wheeled myself over slowly, dreading the forced, plastic smiles and the fake physical affection that was about to be documented for eternity. Chloe's family, the formidable real estate dynasty, arranged themselves flawlessly on the right side of the staircase, the men in sharp tuxedos and the women in flowing gowns. My parents quickly took their places on the left, beaming with an overwhelming, almost aggressive pride. Caleb stood directly in the center with Chloe, looking like a king surveying his kingdom. I moved my wheelchair to the far edge of the group, leaving a respectful, wide gap so I wouldn't accidentally run over anyone's expensive designer shoes or ruin the flow of the dresses. I wanted to be in the frame as my mother had demanded, but I wanted to be as unobtrusive as possible. No, absolutely not," Caleb snapped suddenly, breaking his perfect, camera-ready smile. He stepped forward and pointed a rigid finger to a standard, straight-backed wooden banquet chair sitting near the edge of the photography setup. "Julian, get out of that black monstrosity right now. Sit in the wooden chair. I want the heights of the groomsmen and family to be uniform, and I absolutely do not want that ugly, depressing metal thing ruining my wedding announcement photos in the society pages." The entire crowd went completely quiet. The gentle hum of conversation died instantly. Dozens of eyes, heavy with judgment and curiosity, turned directly to me. I looked at the delicate wooden chair he was pointing at. It was a purely decorative piece of furniture. It had absolutely no armrests. It had a flat, highly polished, slippery silk cushion. For someone with a complete T10 spinal cord injury like mine, sitting on a chair like that without any lateral support is medically and physically impossible. I have absolutely zero functioning abdominal muscles. I have no core balance whatsoever. Gravity dictates that without a specialized, rigid backrest and a slight dump angle in the seat to hold my hips in place, my upper body will simply fold forward like a rag doll or violently tip sideways to the floor. It's not a matter of willpower. It's basic, undeniable physics. "Caleb, I can't," I said clearly and calmly, desperately trying to keep the rising panic and deep humiliation out of my voice. "You know my injury level perfectly well. I do not have the core strength to balance on a standard banquet chair. If I sit there, I will fall over." "Stop being so difficult," my mother hissed venomously from through her rigidly fixed, terrifying smile, leaning slightly toward me. "Just do it for 5 minutes, Julian. Stop making everything about your limitations. Stop ruining the picture." "Mom, I physically cannot do it," I repeated, my voice growing firmer, louder, echoing slightly in the sudden quiet of the garden. I refused to let them shame me for my disability. I looked directly into Caleb's furious eyes. "I am staying in my chair. It's the only safe place for me to sit. If you don't want the wheelchair in the photo, that's fine. I will step out. You can take the family picture without me." I went to back up, gripping the cool metal handrims tightly to wheel myself entirely out of the camera's frame. I was setting a definitive boundary. A quiet, non-violent, but absolute boundary. I was removing myself from the situation to keep the peace. That was the ultimate trigger. To a raging narcissist like Caleb, setting a boundary in public, choosing to walk away rather than obey his direct command, is the ultimate, unforgivable insult. It was a direct challenge to his absolute authority in front of the billionaire family he was so desperately trying to impress and control. Caleb's face turned a mottled, terrifying shade of furious red. He completely abandoned his suave, sophisticated, high-society persona in a fraction of a second. He stormed over to me, his heavy, expensive leather dress shoes cracking sharply against the stone pavement, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. "You selfish, manipulative little freak," he hissed, leaning down so his face was inches from mine. His voice was low enough that only the immediate family and a few close bystanders could hear the exact, venomous words, though everyone in the venue could see the intense, terrifying aggression radiating from him. "You're just jealous. You're a pathetic, bitter loser who couldn't cut it as an architect. And now you want to drag me down to your miserable level. Stand up. Stop faking it for the pity and stand the hell up." Before I could even process the absolute, delusional insanity of his words, before I could even raise my hands to defend my face or brace my body, Caleb lunged. He dug his strong hands violently under my armpits, his iron grip bruising my ribs through my thin linen suit, and he yanked upward with a terrifying, sudden surge of adrenaline-fueled strength. The physics of a specialized wheelchair are precise and delicate. When you forcefully pull a paralyzed person forward and upward without any warning, the center of gravity shifts disastrously. My legs, which were completely dead weight that I couldn't command to step forward to catch my balance, dragged heavily and awkwardly against the metal footplate of the chair. I was pulled entirely out of my secure, perfectly balanced seat. For one terrifying, weightless, agonizing second, I was suspended in the air, completely helpless. I scrambled frantically, my hands desperately clawing at the air, trying to find the secure armrests of my chair, but I only caught empty air. The chair rolled slightly backward, away from me. Caleb, fueled by blind, uncontrollable rage, took a sudden step backward to gain more leverage to pull me, and in doing so, he tripped heavily over the edge of my chair's rear anti-tip wheel. He lost his footing completely, and to save his own balance and prevent himself from ruining his suit on the ground, he let go of me completely. He stumbled back, his arms flailing, and miraculously caught himself, remaining upright. I didn't. With absolutely zero muscle control below my ribs to brace myself, I launched forward like a felled tree, propelled by the exact momentum Caleb had created. The world tilted sickeningly around me. The blue sky spun. The last thing I saw before the devastating impact was the glittering, impossible height of the $10,000 champagne tower directly in my immediate path, sparkling maliciously in the sunlight. I hit the glass. The sound was deafening. A catastrophic, earth-shattering explosion of thick crystal and pressurized liquid. Hundreds of heavy goblets crashed down around me in a torrential rain of sharp edges, shattering into thousands of razor-sharp fragments. I hit the hard marble floor, the wind violently knocked out of my lungs, a heavy, unopened bottle striking my shoulder with a sickening crunch. And as the warm blood began to pool rapidly around me, staining my pale blue suit, and the horrified whispers of the wealthy guests started to rise into a cacophony of panic, Caleb stepped forward. He stood directly over my bleeding, paralyzed body and began his final, most despicable performance. He didn't know that his reign of terror was over. He didn't know that the end of his perfect, fabricated life was already walking purposefully through the shocked crowd, reaching for a cell phone to dial 911. The cold, unforgiving surface of the imported marble floor pressed against my cheek, sticky with the rapidly expanding pool of champagne and my own blood. My vision blurred around the edges, tunneling in on the horrific scene unfolding above me. The physical pain radiating from my shoulder, where the heavy, unbroken bottle of Dom Perignon had struck me, was blinding. But what hurt infinitely more was the sound of my brother's voice, completely devoid of empathy, echoing across the silent, horrified crowd. Caleb stood over my shattered body, meticulously adjusting the cuffs of his ruined ivory suit, and confidently declared to a garden full of high society elites that I had thrown myself into the glass just to ruin his perfect day. He didn't stop there. He leaned into the silence, his voice dripping with a manufactured, theatrical exasperation. "Look at him," Caleb sneered, gesturing broadly toward my bleeding form. "This is exactly what I was warning you all about. He has been faking this entire paralysis act for 2 years. He sits in that ridiculous chair to milk my parents for their money, to drain the family resources, and to manipulate everyone around him. He is a fraud. He has full feeling in his legs. This is just a pathetic, desperate attempt to steal the spotlight because he can't handle the fact that I am getting a massive promotion in the real estate world while he sits at home doing nothing." My mother, standing just a few feet away, actually placed a comforting hand on Caleb's shoulder. She didn't look at my bleeding face. She looked at Chloe's billionaire parents, her expression morphing into a mask of deeply practiced, tragic suffering. "We have tried so hard to get him psychiatric help." My mother lied smoothly, her voice carrying a fake tremor. "It has been a nightmare for our family. Caleb has been so patient with him." I lay there, trapped in my immobile body, suffocating under the crushing weight of their absolute cruelty. It felt like I was attending the funeral of my own sanity. They were actually going to get away with it. They were going to rewrite history right here, in front of 200 people, and use my broken body as the ultimate prop for Caleb's victim narrative. I closed my eyes, a single tear of pure, unadulterated defeat mixing with the blood on my face. I prepared myself to simply check out, to let the darkness take over, because fighting this level of coordinated family manipulation felt entirely impossible. "Step away from him immediately. Do not touch him." The voice cut through the heavy, toxic atmosphere of the garden like a surgical blade. It wasn't loud, but it possessed a terrifying, undeniable authority that demanded absolute obedience. I forced my eyes open. Pushing through the crowd of stunned, whispering socialites was an older gentleman. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair neatly combed back. I didn't recognize him at first, but the way the crowd naturally parted for him spoke volumes about his status. He didn't look at Caleb. He didn't acknowledge my mother's fake tears. His piercing, intelligent eyes were locked entirely on my twisted position on the floor. Without a single moment of hesitation, the man dropped to his knees right into the treacherous mixture of broken crystal, champagne, and blood. He didn't flinch as the sharp glass crunched beneath his expensive trousers. His hands, incredibly steady and warm, immediately cradled the sides of my head, locking my neck into a rigid, perfectly neutral position. "I am securing the cervical spine," the man stated calmly, his eyes scanning my face for signs of consciousness. "Can you hear me, son? Do not attempt to nod. Just blink if you understand me." I blinked twice, my breath catching in my throat. The sheer relief of having anyone, treat me like a human being in medical distress rather than a dramatic inconvenience was overwhelming. "Good," the man said softly, his thumbs resting gently against my jawline. "Stay exactly as you are. Your breathing is shallow. We are going to wait for the paramedics." Caleb, completely thrown off balance by this sudden, authoritative intervention, stepped forward. His face was a mixture of confusion and rising, narcissistic anger. He was losing custody of the situation, losing control of his carefully constructed narrative, and he couldn't handle it. "Excuse me, sir," Caleb said, puffing out his chest and attempting to use his most persuasive, dominant broker voice. "I appreciate you stepping in, but there's really no need for all this drama. He's my younger brother. I know exactly what he's doing. He is completely faking it. If you just let go of him, I promise you he will stand right up. He's just throwing a tantrum." The older man did not move his hands from my head. He didn't even look up at Caleb right away. He simply finished assessing my pulse before slowly, deliberately lifting his gaze. The look in his eyes was so profoundly cold, so completely devoid of any tolerance for Caleb's nonsense, that I actually saw my brother take a physical step backward. "You are telling me," the man said, his voice deadly quiet but carrying across the dead silent lawn, that this man, who currently lacks any motor reflex in his lower extremities following a traumatic impact, is simply faking his condition? Yes, exactly, Caleb insisted, though his voice wavered slightly under the intense scrutiny. It's a psychological issue. Munchausen syndrome. He's manipulated our parents out of their savings, tried to ruin my real estate deals, and now he's trying to ruin my engagement party. Chloe, the beautiful fiancée, suddenly pushed her way to the front of the crowd. Her face was paper white, her hands trembling as she clutched her designer purse. "Uncle Victor?" she asked, her voice high and tight with confusion. "What are you doing?" Caleb says he's faking. The man, Uncle Victor, finally shifted his weight, keeping his hands locked firmly on my neck, and looked directly at Chloe, then back to Caleb. "My name is Dr. Victor Sterling," he announced. His voice wasn't a shout, but it echoed with the devastating weight of absolute truth. "I am the chief of neurosurgery at Mount Sinai Hospital, and I find your medical assessment of your brother's condition incredibly fascinating, young man." A collective, sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd of 200 guests. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated horror. Caleb's jaw practically hit the floor, the arrogant smirk completely melting off his face. Dr. Sterling didn't stop. He turned his terrifying gaze directly onto my parents, who were now shrinking back into the crowd. It is fascinating because exactly 24 months ago, I was called into a massive emergency surgery in the middle of the night. I stood in an operating room for 8 grueling hours, attempting to piece together a spinal column that had been completely pulverized in a high-speed car crash. He looked back down at me, and for a fraction of a second, his strict, professional demeanor softened with a flash of genuine recognition and deep sympathy. Then, his eyes snapped back up to Caleb, burning with a righteous, unforgiving fury. "I am the surgeon who personally drilled 8 titanium pedicle screws into your brother's T10 and T11 vertebrae," Dr. Sterling stated, his words hitting the crowd like physical blows. "I am the one who reviewed his completely severed spinal cord. I am the one who had to tell this young man that he would never take another step for the rest of his natural life. So, unless you have recently acquired a medical degree that supersedes my 30 years of neurosurgical practice, I suggest you shut your mouth before I have you arrested for the gross, violent assault of a paraplegic." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when a bomb goes off, leaving a vacuum in the air before the shockwave hits. Caleb was completely paralyzed. He opened his mouth to speak, to spin another lie, to somehow salvage his promotion, his inheritance, and his wealthy bride, but no words came out. The absolute, undeniable authority of a world-renowned surgeon, who also happened to be his future wife's beloved uncle, had instantly, effortlessly obliterated 2 entire years of meticulously crafted lies. I lay there on the cold marble, the blood still dripping from my chin, and for the first time in 24 months, I didn't feel broken. I felt a massive, heavy chain snap and fall away from my chest. The truth was out. The golden child was exposed in the harshest, most undeniable light possible. And the storm was only just beginning. The immediate aftermath of Dr. Sterling's devastating revelation was pure, unadulterated chaos. The pristine, pastel-colored garden party instantly transformed into a frantic crime scene. Sirens began wailing in the distance, growing louder by the second, cutting through the murmurs of the horrified high society guests. Caleb, realizing that his entire carefully constructed universe was collapsing around him, went into absolute panic mode. He turned to Chloe, reaching out with desperate, blood-stained hands. "Chloe, baby, listen to me," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "He's mistaken. My parents can verify it. Julian was drunk that night. Julian crashed the car. I was just trying to help him stand up for the photo and he slipped." Chloe backed away from him as if he were carrying a highly infectious disease. She looked at his hands, then looked down at my bleeding body, and finally looked at her Uncle Victor, who gave her a single grim nod. "Don't you dare touch me, Caleb," Chloe whispered, her voice shaking with absolute disgust. Without a moment of hesitation, she reached for her left hand, slid the massive, custom-designed diamond engagement ring off her finger, and threw it directly at Caleb's chest. It bounced off his ruined ivory suit and clattered into the bloody glass on the floor. "We are done. Do not ever contact me or my family again." With that single action, Caleb's access to the billionaire real estate empire, his pending promotion, and his entire future vanished into thin air. Before Caleb could even process the loss of his fiancée, two uniformed police officers sprinted through the wrought iron gates, closely followed by a team of paramedics carrying a rigid backboard. Dr. Sterling immediately took command of the medical team, rattling off my surgical history, my current vitals, and strict instructions on how to move me without exacerbating the potential cervical spine trauma. As the paramedics carefully strapped me to the board, applying a rigid neck collar, one of the police officers turned to the crowd. "Who called this in? What exactly happened here?" My father, ever the desperate enabler, stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Officer, it's just a terrible family misunderstanding. My youngest son here, he's in a wheelchair. He lost his balance and fell into the table. It was a complete accident. There's no need for law enforcement. We handle our own family matters." That is a bold-faced lie. A man stepped out from the crowd of stunned guests. I recognized him instantly. It was Sebastian, Chloe's fiercely protective older brother, and the chief operating officer of their family's massive real estate development firm. He was a man whose salary and influence dwarfed anything Caleb could ever hope to achieve. Sebastian walked straight up to the police officer, pointing a firm, unwavering finger directly at Caleb. I was standing less than 10 feet away. I watched that man intentionally and maliciously grab his paralyzed brother by the jacket, yank him out of his specialized wheelchair, and violently throw him headfirst into that glass tower. It was unprovoked, it was deliberate, and it was the most sickening display of violence I have ever witnessed. I will gladly provide a formal written statement, and I have the entire incident caught on the security cameras my firm installed around this perimeter. The officer didn't need to hear another word. He turned to Caleb, pulled his handcuffs from his belt, and ordered Caleb to turn around and place his hands behind his back. "Caleb Wells, you are under arrest for aggravated assault," the officer stated firmly, the metallic click of the handcuffs sounding louder than the sirens. My mother let out a blood-curdling shriek. "No, you can't take him. He's a senior broker. He has a clean record. You're ruining his life." I was loaded into the back of the ambulance, Dr. Sterling climbing in right beside me, leaving my screaming mother, my pale, silent father, and my handcuffed, weeping brother behind in the ruins of their shattered social standing. 2 hours later, I was lying in a private, highly secure VIP recovery room at Mount Sinai Hospital. Dr. Sterling had personally pulled every string necessary to ensure I wasn't placed in a public ward where my parents could easily access me. My cuts had been meticulously stitched, my shoulder was heavily bruised but miraculously unbroken, and the CT scans confirmed that my spinal fusion hardware remained intact. I was exhausted, floating on a sea of intravenous pain medication, when the heavy oak door of my room swung open. My parents burst in. They looked completely disheveled, their expensive clothes rumpled, their faces pale and desperate. They didn't rush to my bedside to ask how my injuries were. They didn't apologize for standing by while Caleb nearly killed me. They immediately went on the offensive. "Julian, you have to fix this right now," my father demanded, his voice a harsh, frantic whisper. "Caleb is sitting in a holding cell. They are going to charge him with a felony. Do you understand what that means? He will lose his broker's license immediately. He will lose his promotion. The lawsuit will bankrupt him. You need to call the police right now. Tell them Sebastian was mistaken, and drop all the charges." My mother grabbed the edge of my bed, her eyes wild. "We will lose everything, Julian. The scandal is already spreading. You have to sign a statement saying it was a mutual altercation, or that you slipped." Family protects family. We can't let him go to prison. I stared at the two people who brought me into this world. I looked at the utter panic in their eyes, a panic that was entirely reserved for their golden child, while they completely ignored the 30 stitches holding my face and hands together. The last shred of familial obligation, the tiny, lingering hope that they might actually love me, evaporated into the sterile hospital air. "Get out," I said. My voice was raspy from the neck collar, but it was incredibly steady. "Julian, don't be so stubborn." My father started, his face reddening with anger. "I said get out," I repeated, louder this time. "I am not dropping a single charge. Caleb made his choice. You made your choice 2 years ago when you forced me to take the blame for the crash. I am done protecting this toxic family." Before my father could erupt into a screaming match, the door opened again. A tall, impeccably dressed woman carrying a sleek leather briefcase walked into the room. She had sharp, calculating eyes and an aura of absolute, terrifying competence. "Mr. and Mrs. Wells," the woman said, her tone perfectly polite but sharp as a razor. "I strongly suggest you step away from my client before I have hospital security physically remove you and add witness tampering and harassment to the growing list of legal issues facing your family." My parents froze. "Who the hell are you?" my father demanded. The woman handed him a crisp, white business card. "I am Samantha Hayes. I am Julian's attorney, and I am currently coordinating with the district attorney's office regarding the felony aggravated assault charges against your eldest son." Samantha walked over to my bed, offered me a reassuring, professional smile, and then turned her predatory gaze back to my parents. "Let me make this incredibly clear for both of you," Samantha said, her voice dropping to a serious, commanding register. "The DA has rock-solid eyewitness testimony from a highly credible CEO, physical evidence, and full medical documentation of the injuries sustained by a disabled victim. Caleb is facing a mandatory minimum of 10 years in a state penitentiary. There is absolutely no talking your way out of this." My mother let out a small, pathetic whimper, leaning heavily against the wall. "However," Samantha continued, her eyes narrowing slightly, "the district attorney is willing to entertain a single plea deal to avoid a lengthy, highly publicized trial that would drag your family's name further through the mud. If Caleb pleads guilty to a lesser charge of reckless endangerment, he will serve 2 years in prison instead of 10. 2 years? My father gasped, looking horrified. "He can't survive 2 years in a cage. His career is already over, Richard," Samantha snapped coldly. 2 years is a gift, but this plea deal comes with a non-negotiable condition from my client. You will pay full, comprehensive medical and emotional restitution to Julian. You will compensate him for the injuries, the trauma, the destruction of his medical equipment, and the years of financial neglect." My parents looked at each other, a flicker of desperate hope igniting in their eyes. They thought they could just write a quick check and make the problem vanish. "Fine," my father said quickly, pulling out his checkbook. "How much? 10,000? 20? Samantha didn't even blink. She opened her briefcase, pulled out a heavily documented legal binder, and dropped it onto the small table with a loud, authoritative thud. "$420,000, Samantha stated clearly. "Wired directly into my firm's escrow account within 48 hours, or the plea deal is instantly revoked, we go to trial, and Caleb serves a decade behind bars." The color drained entirely from my father's face, leaving him looking like a hollow, terrified ghost. My mother actually had to sit down in the small visitor's chair, her hands shaking violently. "$420,000? My father repeated, his voice barely a squeak. "That's impossible. We don't just have that kind of liquid cash sitting in a checking account. You're trying to ruin us." "I am merely calculating the exact cost of the damage your family has inflicted," Samantha replied, entirely unbothered by his panic. "Julian's new specialized wheelchair alone is $5,000. The current hospital bills, the future required physical therapy for the severe muscle trauma, the psychiatric care for the emotional abuse, and the massive punitive damages for the intentional, malicious nature of the assault. $420,000 is actually quite generous. If we take this to civil court alongside the criminal trial, a jury will easily award him millions. I watched my parents process the devastating reality of the trap they had built for themselves. For years, they had prioritized wealth, status, and appearances above all else. They had used money as a weapon to control me, threatening to cut me off, threatening to leave me destitute if I didn't comply with their demands to protect Caleb. Now, that exact same weapon was being turned squarely back on them. "We can't get that money in 48 hours, my mother sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "We would have to liquidate our entire 401k. We would have to sell the vacation house. We would have to drain the massive inheritance account we've been building for Caleb's future children." I lay perfectly still in my hospital bed, looking at the ceiling, feeling an incredible, overwhelming sense of poetic justice wash over me. The inheritance, the college funds, the sacred retirement accounts. They were going to lose absolutely everything they valued, not because I was vindictive, but because they desperately had to buy their golden child out of a decade in a concrete cell. "That is a financial decision you will have to make as a family," Samantha said, closing her briefcase with a sharp, final click. "You have 48 hours. If the wire transfer does not hit my account by 5 p.m. on Friday, the district attorney will proceed with the maximum felony charges. Now please leave. My client needs to rest." They left the room in absolute, crushing silence. There were no more threats. There was no more manipulation. They were entirely, utterly defeated. Over the next 2 days, my lawyer kept me closely updated on the sheer, catastrophic financial panic occurring within my family. My parents scrambled like cornered animals. They took a massive, agonizing tax penalty to instantly liquidate their 401k retirement accounts. They sold their beloved sailboat to a liquidator for pennies on the dollar. They entirely drained the massive, sacred inheritance trust they had stubbornly hoarded for Caleb. At exactly 4:45 p.m. on Friday, 15 minutes before the absolute deadline, Samantha walked into my hospital room with a small, satisfied smile on her face. "The wire transfer just cleared," she announced, holding up her tablet to show me the unbelievable number sitting safely in my newly established, fiercely protected trust account. $420,000. "It's done, Julian. You are financially secure for the foreseeable future." I closed my eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. The heavy, suffocating chain of poverty and dependence that had dragged me down for 2 agonizing years was finally gone. The legal consequences for Caleb were swift and entirely brutal. Because of the irrefutable video evidence, the high-profile eyewitness testimony, and the massive public scandal, the judge showed absolutely zero leniency during the plea hearing. Caleb stood in the courtroom, stripped of his designer suits, wearing a standard orange jumpsuit. He looked broken, terrified, and incredibly small. The judge formally sentenced him to 2 years in a state correctional facility. The moment the gavel came down, Caleb's real estate broker's license was permanently revoked by the state board. His firm fired him publicly, distancing themselves from the PR nightmare. The massive, high-paying promotion he had literally sold his soul for was handed to someone else. His wealthy fiancée was gone. His reputation was entirely incinerated. As for me, I didn't waste a single second looking back. The moment I was medically cleared to leave the hospital, I used a portion of the settlement money to completely pay off the mountain of medical debt my parents had maliciously forced me to carry. I hired a specialized moving company to pack up my depressing, inaccessible apartment, and I signed a lease on a stunning, fully accessible, high-end apartment right in the center of the city. But I didn't stop there. With my profound financial freedom, I finally had the resources to explore options that my parents' neglect had previously made impossible. Through the extensive medical network of Dr. Sterling, who had become a fierce mentor and advocate for me, I was accepted into an incredibly exclusive, highly experimental neurorehabilitation program at a cutting-edge clinic in Zurich, Switzerland. The program focused on advanced, surgically implanted neural chips designed to bridge the gap over severed spinal cords, attempting to reconnect the brain signals to the dormant lower limbs. It was incredibly expensive. It was entirely experimental. There were absolutely no guarantees of success. But for the first time in 2 years, I had the money to take the risk, and I had absolutely nothing tying me to the toxic wasteland of my past. I booked a first-class ticket, packed my bags, and flew across the world, leaving the shattered, bankrupt remains of the Wells family far behind me. 18 months have passed since the courtroom gavel fell and Caleb was taken away in handcuffs. Today, I am sitting in my matte black, ultra-lightweight wheelchair on a sun-drenched, wooden boardwalk overlooking a pristine beach in the south of France. The Mediterranean Sea stretches out before me, a brilliant, sparkling expanse of sapphire blue that looks like it belongs in a painting. The warm, salty breeze washes over my face, and for the first time in almost 4 years, I feel completely, fundamentally at peace. Elena, my fiercely loyal physical therapist who refused to let me give up during those dark days in my cheap apartment, is sitting in a lounge chair next to me, reading a novel and occasionally sipping an iced coffee. I flew her out here to join me, hiring her full-time to oversee my rigorous daily rehabilitation schedule. She isn't just my therapist anymore. She is my chosen family. She is the loyal, protective sister I never had. My phone vibrates softly in the side pouch of my chair. I pull it out, squinting against the bright afternoon sun. It's an email. The sender name makes my stomach tighten for a brief fraction of a second. Eleanor Wells. My mother. I had changed my phone number, blocked their emails, and completely severed all contact before I left the country. But somehow, she had managed to track down my new private medical contact email address. I opened the message. There is no desperate plea for money, no toxic manipulation. It's just a scanned image of a handwritten letter. The handwriting is Caleb's. It's written on cheap, lined prison paper. I read the words slowly. Caleb writes that he was released on parole a few weeks ago. He doesn't make excuses. He doesn't try to gaslight me. He bluntly states that the reality of prison, the total loss of his freedom, his career, and his identity, finally forced him to look in the mirror. He apologizes for the car crash. He apologizes for forcing me to lie. He apologizes for the horrific assault at the engagement party. He also mentions, almost as an afterthought, the devastating collateral damage of our parents' actions. He writes that the massive financial strain of paying my restitution, combined with the total loss of their social standing, had completely destroyed their toxic marriage. They had lost their house. They were currently navigating a bitter, highly contested divorce, fighting over the few meager assets they had left. My father was living in a cheap rental, and my mother had lost custody of the country club lifestyle she valued above all else. I read the letter twice. I look at the words on the screen, expecting to feel a surge of vindictive triumph, or perhaps a lingering wave of sadness. But honestly, I feel absolutely nothing. There is no resentment burning in my chest anymore. There is no desperate need for their validation, no lingering hope that we can somehow rebuild a bridge that was fundamentally rotten from the start. They had made their choices. They had sacrificed my body, my career, and my truth to protect a lie. The fact that the lie ultimately destroyed them is simply the natural consequence of their own actions. I tap the screen, hit delete, and permanently block the email address. The past is dead, and I am finally free of its ghost. I slide the phone back into my pouch and turn my attention to my legs. I close my eyes, take a deep, centering breath, and focus all of my mental energy, every ounce of my willpower, on the experimental neural chip implanted at the base of my spine. I visualize the electrical signals traveling down from my brain, navigating the complex, microscopic bridge over the scar tissue of my T10 injury, reaching down into the dormant nerves of my lower extremities. I focus. I push. I demand movement. I open my eyes and look down at my right foot, resting securely on the footplate of my wheelchair. Slowly, deliberately, with immense, agonizing effort, my right big toe twitches. It's a tiny movement, barely half an inch, but it is real. It is undeniable, voluntary, neurologically driven movement. A massive, brilliant smile breaks across my face. It's not a miraculous, cinematic moment where I suddenly stand up and run down the beach. Recovery from a complete spinal cord injury doesn't work like that. It will take years of grueling, exhausting therapy to achieve even minor functional movement. But that tiny twitch, that is the ultimate proof of life. That is the undeniable evidence that I am not broken. I am simply rebuilding. The $420,000 didn't buy me new legs, but it bought me the choices, the resources, and the absolute freedom to fight for my own future on my own terms. Hey, Elena, I call out, my voice thick with emotion. She lowers her book, looking over at me with a questioning smile. Yeah, Julian? You need something? Let's get back to the clinic, I say, grabbing the handrims of my chair and spinning myself around toward the boardwalk with a renewed, fierce energy. I think it's time to start pushing harder. I have a lot of living left to do. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to draw a hard, unforgiving boundary to protect your own peace and sanity? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Remember, family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by respect, love, and the courage to protect each other. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing.